Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. It's about that time. And specifically for this Oklahoma program, I look at this team and say they might be one of those teams that are extremely aggressive in the transfer portal. Now, Dill, you know how you kind of approach these conversations. You look at the roster, you take a look at how they performed, what they have coming back next year. I I'm gonna come out and say it. Like, what if this offensive line was just average in the SEC and they weren't just moving and trying to figure out a different combination seemingly every single game they played? And then what if, your five top wide receivers did not go down with injury? Like this Oklahoma team, like I kind of came into this exercise, if you will, and said, well, we're gonna have to talk about a lot of different positions. And I came out of it like, if you can address the two biggest flaws on this football team, most notably the offensive line, I think all Oklahoma fans figured out if you go into the SEC with a bad offensive line, it is going to be really hard to consistently win games. Oklahoma learned that the hard way. If you can fix this offensive line and kind of add a few other pieces that we're going to talk about, this team can win at a high level in 2025. There's zero doubt in my mind. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Oklahoma fans, one, happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate you guys. The boys are extremely thankful for the Oklahoma fans. Still, really one of the first fan bases that really started listening to us. So we appreciate you guys. Hope you all have a good Thanksgiving. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. We're going to have these conversations a lot over the next couple of weeks and continue to update the names that Oklahoma should go after. So would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. Dill, without further ado, now I just rambled a little bit. Let's get into this one. Offensive line. And I want to start with the take. Now, we're going to talk about a few names that intrigue me, but I more want to focus in on the conversation of how Oklahoma decides to address the offensive line this year in the transfer portal, where you go back to last offseason. They took guys like Spencer Brown. They took guys like Michael Tarquin. Guys that we had a large sample size of them being average at best offensive linemen at the Power 4 level, and it just didn't work. Like, as much as we tried to sell Spencer Brown having traits and potentially developing in his last year, we saw the last 4 years of him at Michigan State. It wasn't great. So how does Oklahoma kind of change up the process in terms of adding some offensive linemen in the transfer portal? Dill, I went back and looked at it and said, all right, what from the offensive linemen that were in the portal last year, which were the ones that were the most successful? And it is overwhelmingly guys that were at the group of five level that had played 3 straight seasons or played a ton of football over the last couple of years at a really high level and then jumped up. The guys that have a lot of experience under the belt, and it might not be against SEC level competition, but they've played a lot of football. And I think the best example for Oklahoma, for Beachy Nuewu, from North Texas, was probably the best transfer portal addition on the offensive line Oklahoma made. How would you like to see Oklahoma go out and address this offensive line in the transfer portal?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, and there might have been an element of Oklahoma thinking that Jacob Sexton and Jacob Taylor were going to step in and be guys
Yeah.
that would develop. So you're looking, because if you were going in thinking Michael Tarquin and
Spencer Brown, like
will be your guys, like you weren't watching enough football, because you're like, Spencer Brown just struggled pretty much his whole career at Michigan State. Tarquin's
Michael
had
Tarquin.
moments of playing good, but not consistently by any means. So you look like, I'm certainly thinking a lot of that had to do with just Sexton and Taylor not being able to put a consistent season together.
Yeah.
Because if they really thought that Tarquin and Spencer Brown were going to be the answers as the starters, then that's like a philosophical problem. Because I think anyone could know that
Well,
they're
I think like what the thought process was probably just elevate. And this is kind of how, when we broke down the commitments, we said elevate the floor. Like, yeah, at least these guys can play, but they can't play well. And then we saw them go into the SEC and just not really be serviceable starting offensive linemen. So now you're addressing it going into 2025. And I'll say this: I look on the inside of the offensive line. That should be good from the high school pipeline you have. And then you do have some intriguing tackles who are coming in as true freshmen, but you don't want to just rely on true freshmen starting in the SEC. It's rare. And so you feel good about guys like Pierre Louis. Eugene Brooks, I think, is going to be a stud at some point during his time at Oklahoma. Fabici Nuewu has another year of eligibility. Look on the inside and say that should be a strong unit. The tackle position, you still are kind of asking questions about. I got a couple names. I'm going to start with Derek Simmons. He's actually in the transfer portal right now, and I probably should say this right off the top. We're going to be doing a little bit of projecting as well. Derek Simmons, you take a look at him at Western Carolina, and again, FCS to the SEC, that's a big jump. We've seen that, and Derek Simmons has played very good football for West Carolina. Another guy that I would look at, Gage Casey from Boise State. That's a guy that has played extremely well, especially this year. Kind of emerged last year, was a developmental tackle from the state of Oregon. Redshirts 1 year, becomes a really good tackle out of the Mountain West, probably the best G5 conference that we see in college football. We saw a lot of Mountain West transfers have a lot of success at the Power 4 level. I think Fernando Carmona being the best example. This one would make sense if he is the transfer portal. And then going to the Big Ten, Dill, Caleb Tierman, another guy that against Michigan, I thought acquitted himself quite well. Did also against Ohio State. So you kind of know against those elite edge rushers, he can play good football. You got two guys that I'm throwing out there from G5/FCS that have played a lot of football. You got one proven Power 4 target. And again, I'm not sure if these guys are entering the transfer portal. We know one of them is Derek Simmons, but the more the conversation is, to me, these are the kind of tackles I would like to see Oklahoma turn it up for in the transfer portal over the next couple weeks.
I would agree with that because you look like, you could have watched Fernando Carmona at San Jose State.
It's awesome.
Like, that guy has the traits you want. Like, he has the athleticism, he has the quickness, he has the strength, like some of those things. So, yeah, you still need to do a bit of projecting, but there's a difference between being able to do projecting and then being able to just be like, well, I know for a fact that guy's not good enough. Like, I've seen enough of him at big time levels and like hasn't gotten it done exactly.
It's almost like you don't have an answer. Like if Fernando Carmona, at least we don't really know what it'll look like. We know what it looks like at the G5 level. It's really good, but we don't like for Tarquin and Spencer Brown, like you kind of knew what you were getting, and you weren't really getting high-end starting caliber offensive line play. The one other like potential type of tackle you'll see, guys like Lance Hurd, and Lance Hurd would have been a good addition. He kind of had extenuating circumstances where he didn't play tackle at LSU because he was behind two NFL guys who are going to be playing on Sundays next year. But for the most part, I'd stick to proven guys, even if they're at the G5 level, than highly touted high school kids.
Right, because it'd be like the Georgia kids. Like Georgia just recruited 4 high-level offensive tackles, I think, in the 2023 class. You could get maybe 2024. One of those classes, they brought in 4 offensive tackles. Probably 2 of them are going to be out at some point. I don't know that those are the guys like I'm going after if I'm Oklahoma. Just because that's like if they were good enough, they'd have found a way to make it happen on Georgia.
And also, it's really a hard position to evaluate out of the high school ranks. Like you see just a lot of big-time offensive tackles not put it together in college. And so go get proven guys who've shown they can do it at the college football level, even if it's not in the SEC. So that's kind of my take on the offensive line. And again, Oklahoma fans will update the board as we see names trickle in. Another, like a lot of Ivy League tackles played pretty damn good football as well. I mean, Jalen Rivers, Jalen Travis, I think his name is, at Iowa State. I mean, he's grading out exceptionally well coming over from Princeton. And so, like there's a good sample size of those guys making that jump to the Power 4 level.
Mendoza at Louisville, so you're right. I mean, there's like that ability. If you played really good at the lower levels of college football, I do think that's a much preferable mix.
Than just like an average or projecting a P4 transfer. Edge rushers. And is this necessarily a glaring concern? I guess we should address wide receivers first, though. Look, it's kind of contingent on what you have coming back and what you have healthy. Like in Oklahoma wide receiver room, that is 100% healthy is probably one of the best wide receiver rooms that we see in the country. I've never seen a position group get decimated with injuries like the wide receiver. And it's so disappointing.
Now there's an element like, nobody could stay healthy last year. Do you think you just need to bring in a new crop or at least a couple guys who?
No, I just think it's. Unless there's some of them are leaving it, or if like you're concerned about them coming back, like Andrew Anthony kind of worked his way back, but in my mind, clearly wasn't really himself. If that's the case, yes, I think that's more of a wait and see because I look at this wide receiver room and say, you get like 100% of these guys. It's such a good unit. And if they decide to come back, you're just not going to have a ton of room to add those names either. Now, a position group that we see Brent Venables just every single year, whether it's on the trail, whether it's on the in the transfer portal, enough's never enough, is on the defensive line. And I think specifically in the edge rusher department, as you are going to lose some guys, Downs, Woolard, Trace Ford, you want to be deep at that position. Colin Oliver, bring me. I went back and looked. I was like, all right, in-state kid. Obviously, he's played. He got hurt this year, but played really well for Oklahoma State the last couple of years. And I'm looking. I was like, did Oklahoma offer this kid out of high school? No. Lincoln Riley. What are you doing there? I mean, Colin Oliver was just I liked him coming out of high school. Oklahoma didn't offer him. Go bring him home. And Dill, you look at the trajectory of Oklahoma State. Hey, Mike Gundy's had a good run, but man, it doesn't seem like it's going in the right direction. Colin Oliver coming off the injury. I think it's been very noteworthy that, Mike Gundy said, like, we don't have a ton of resources to kind of keep some of these kids. If you're Oklahoma, go grab Colin Oliver. Like, we all know what this kid can do.
Yeah, I think Colin Oliver's awesome. Like, I think he is the type of playmaker they look for, and probably gives you a little more than probably what they had in 2023, where it didn't feel like they had really productive sack guys. Like, they had good players for sure. You certainly what they were doing, but they weren't putting up the sack numbers you like. I think Colin Oliver is certainly a guy who can do it in a bunch of different ways. I think he's a versatile rusher. I think he plays good against the run. He's certainly one of those guys that, even if you felt like you were good at defensive end, like,
Bring him in. And again, like, what's the blueprint of having a dominant defense is having a deep defensive line. As good as Michigan is on the defensive line, now as Michigan fans, like, we kind of experienced this firsthand. And we probably got the best starting 4 offensive line or defensive line that you see in the country, but the depth is a little bit of a question mark. And at times that has bit Michigan in the butt when you have to play guys like Mason Graham 60 snaps a game. Like, you can never have enough fresh bodies that are good on the defensive line. And Brent Venables certainly believes in that. Like, we've seen him just like completely stockpile guys. Another name, and Dill, this is going to be, I would project this kid to be in the transfer portal, Mike Green from Marshall. No, I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised, and it's okay. You're not familiar with Mike Green, but as I'm starting to dive into these G5 guys, man, I love Mike Green. And Brent Venables is going to like Mike Green too. He's a former second place in the state wrestler in the state of Virginia. He was 6'4", 215, projected as a wide receiver, then projected as a tight end. And they said, we got to move this kid to edge. He just keeps growing. And he transfers over to Marshall. He committed to Virginia at first, transfers over to Marshall. Dill leads the country in sacks, 22% pass rush win rate, 30 quarterback hurries. His not only the power in his hands, but his flexibility and burst to run the arc around offensive tackles is incredible for a 250-pound edge rusher. Absolutely in love with Mike Green. I think a lot of Power 4 programs will be. And Oklahoma is going to be one of the biggest players in the country when it comes to just stockpiling guys on the defensive line. Last name I'll throw out, though, Luke Oz, bring him home. Another guy that was committed to Oklahoma, backs off his commitment, goes to Arkansas. Really good start to the freshman year, then misses the rest of the season with the injury. And for some reason, just not a centerpiece in this Arkansas offense in 2024. He's got 28 targets on the year, playing good football, just not getting targeted. If I'm Luke Haas, and we don't know what's going on with Sam Pittman in the future of this Arkansas program. If I'm Luke saying, hey, I got to go to a place going into my third year that I'm going to get some action, have the opportunity to impact the team, come back home to the Oklahoma Sooners, baby. This kid's a stud.
Presumably, this will be a 2 tight end team. You look at the way they're kind of finishing this year out. Bauer Sharp probably will be back, I would imagine.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of room for 2 tight ends because you look like Brent Venables pretty much said he didn't like the direction of what they were doing early in the year. Once they started just run the ball more consistently and be that type of team, like, yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets. I think you need tight ends who can catch the ball, like Bauer Sharp. Luke Haas, certainly one of those guys who are a more complete tight end. Kind of what I think Oklahoma would
And
be.
Luke Haasdale, I know he's a little undersized, and that was a storyline for him coming out of high school. 6'3", not the biggest frame, blocks his tail off. It kind of looks like Brock Bowers. And I'm not like going to compare him to Brock Bowers, but like Brock Bowers wasn't a guy that when you look at him is like, holy smokes, this guy looks like Megatron. But it's like really good football player. Luke Haas, like the smoothness and the athleticism kind of reminds me of that. And I want to see this kid. And this is almost just like selfish for me. Like, throw him in an offense where he's going to be able to contribute, yes, it probably matters what offensive coordinator you decide to bring in terms of what your personnel grouping is. Man, Luke though, really good football player from the state. There's a couple guys that, especially like some older guys that when Lincoln Riley was there that got out of state, circle back got a few. I think Colin Oliver being the biggest one. We'll sign out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. Let it fly in the comment section. Not necessarily names right now because we'll get more to the names, but if y'all got any positions you would like to see Oklahoma go out and get, would love to hear from you because I look at this and say, Dill, I think Oklahoma's in a much better spot than what their record says. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.